Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. This week we focus on the National Development Council meeting and the fiscal cliff that the United States faces. My guest this week is Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, Deputy Editor of the Indian Express. Welcome back to Policy Watch, Subhomoy. Before Subhomoy and I have a chat, let's get you the week's top headlines. The National Development Council meets in Delhi. The 12th five-year plan approved, growth estimate revised to 8%. The Prime Minister says a relook at the country's energy pricing is crucial, wants fuel prices to be raised in phases. And Barack Obama meets leaders of Congress in an effort to get consensus on policy as fiscal cliff looms large over the US. Those are the headlines. Let's get you this first story right away. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has called for urgent steps to revive the economy and take it on a higher growth trajectory again. Speaking at the NDC meeting, Manmohan Singh sought political consensus on economic policies and said if steps are not taken in time, the economy will fail to clock the target at 8%. A report, take a look. As the National Development Council met in New Delhi on Thursday, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh sounded a note of caution as he deliberated on India's economic agenda for the next 5 years.
I must emphasize that achieving an average of 8% growth following less than 6% in the first year is still an ambitious target. As the plan document makes clear, the high growth scenario will definitely not materialize if we follow a business-as-usual policy.
Manmohan Singh hinted at some more steps and hard decisions like phased removal of subsidy on energy products. This barely 3 months after his government raised prices of subsidized diesel and LPG and opened up the retail sector to FDI.
Immediate adjustment of prices to close the gap is not feasible. I realize this, but some phased price adjustment is necessary. Energy experts are unanimous that we cannot expect to achieve rapid, inclusive and sustainable growth if we are not willing to undertake a phased adjustment in energy prices.
Planning Commission Deputy Chairman Mantak Singh Ahluwalia stressed on policy implementation to achieve development goals. Ahluwalia said the growth scenario now was 8% due to global economic factors, where it could slide to 6.5% if key policy decisions are not implemented. India's growth has hovered around 6% for 3 straight quarters, a far cry from the near double-digit pace seen before the 2008 global financial meltdown. Gujarat Chief Minister Narendra Modi blamed the centre for the dip in the growth rate.
पिछली बार जब हम मिले थे तब 9% ग्रोथ की बात की थी, 7.9% पर आकर के अटक गए और आज इतनी बड़ी मीटिंग, इतना बड़ा फोरम, इतना बड़ा देश सिर्फ 0.3% आगे बढ़ने के लिए चर्चा कर रहा है. ये कितनी बड़ी निराशा है.
There was also drama at the NDC meet when Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Jayalalitha stormed out alleging humiliation. The Chief Ministers were allotted 10 minutes each for their address, to which the Tamil Nadu CM objected and said the voice of the Chief Ministers is being stifled.
To show my protest, I have walked out of the meeting. I have walked out of the NDC meeting because the plan document itself is so lengthy and encompasses so many subjects that no Chief Minister can be expected to present all the views that are necessary for the betterment and progress of the state government in a short period of 10 minutes. Just to allot 10 minutes and humiliate us in this way, they need not have called us all the way to Delhi to participate in this meeting.
The meeting of the NDC, attended by chief ministers and key cabinet ministers, discussed India's financial agenda for the next 5 years and also approved the 12th five-year plan. Bureau Report, RSTV. There you go. Subhomoy, the PM says that even though 8% growth in the next 5 years is a revised target, it's still too ambitious. Why? Explain to us, why is it too ambitious?
This year we're growing at 5.8 at best.
Around.
Next year, around 6. Even if you assume it's 6 and 6, that's 12. For an 8-year target of 8% each would mean 8 into 5, that's 40. you take out 12, that's 28.
Right.
So which means 9% next 3 years. This year, it's already done. Next year, Tata's letter makes it very clear, we are not going to be anywhere before 6. So that means the next 3 years, we have to run around fast at 9% plus.
Which is slightly unlikely given the scenario globally as well.
So, as 9% plus rate of growth, China has reduced its growth rate projections to 7%. So even if we are doing our best, we remove all the irritants, that's asking for way a lot.
And the Prime Minister admits that. He, of course, is a world-renowned economist, and he sees the problem in that growth target. He also says that a high-growth scenario is not really possible if we go around doing it as business as usual. That of course is true, but how do we change the business as usual policy? The Manmohan Singh government has been trying. They did some reforms in September as well, but do you think that's going to be enough, or they need to step up on the gas?
Yeah, stepping up on the gas is the right word.
Yeah, that is the right word. It's ironic, but it's the right word.
That's exactly the point. I mean, gas reforms are probably the biggest problem that's right now there in the terms of economic difficulty issues. Subsidies, you really can't get that huge chunk reorganized, redistributed. And then we have got the food subsidy, the Food Security Act that's coming. That's going to add on problems.
Additional burden on the...
Exactly. So we've got Food Security Act, which is going to add about 120 to 140 lakh crore. On top of that, if you have the current gas subsidy pricing, then that's 1 lakh crore easily. So that's 240. We aren't even talking fertilizers here. So it's 3 lakh crore. The Government of India budget is 14 lakh crore. Out of that 3 lakh crore goes. So what remains?
Right. So I want to talk about the gas and energy pricing in just a bit. I want to ask you this. You also hinted at some hard steps that need to be taken. They are in the offing. And this comes barely 3 months after LPG and diesel was raised. Also FDI in retail was passed. What else could be in store then? Like the land acquisition bill has been passed by the cabinet, but it has to get approval from Parliament. Do you think one of those steps, land acquisition, could also be one of those steps? Yeah,
that could be, but that wouldn't be a very strong game changer in the sense that to a certain extent would actually raise the cost of acquiring land. So it's not something that really, it definitely has a peace dividend in the sense that if it gives the right signal to states, to the people that yes, fine, land would not be taken by force, there is a benefit that could come out of it, sure enough, but that really doesn't change the game much. The big change would be getting the GST and the DTC, especially the goods and service tax.
But there is still no consensus on GST. I mean, we all hear about optimistic utterings from ministers and bureaucrats every day, day in and day out. But the fact remains that most of the states, especially the non-Congress, non-UPA ruled states, are still not on board with GST.
I suppose so. And right now the timetable looks like it'll be past the 2014 general elections.
Right.
Or whenever the general elections come through.
To what extent, Subhomoy, is the global slowdown, which we've experienced for the past 2-3 years, the global scenario, to be blamed for low growth? We also know that domestic demand is a problem. Domestic demand has been coming down in the recent past. Do you think domestic demand and global demand coupled together are going to be the biggest obstacle for India to achieve that high growth target?
Yeah, in a way, like if you look at organizations like the Tata Group, which derives 60% of its revenue from abroad. Now, that group obviously is going to be affected by the global slowdown. So the more the Indian industrial groups synergize with the rest of the world, their position gets affected. Exports do definitely, I mean, you won't expect the export benefit to come through. And the IT sector is obviously one which is now getting in ready for a large, long-range secular decline over the years. So these are definitely not something which is a very happy set of circumstances. But of course, our main problem in terms of the growth reduction, as an RBI paper pointed out, essentially came from a policy problem.
Right. So do you think, after all these reforms, so-called reforms, do you think this policy paralysis tag that we heard so much about, do you think that still applies to the UPA government?
No, may not be. I mean,
maybe policy confusion then.
Yeah, possibly. Something on those lines. Yeah. But I suppose the point is to get things to gradually move on. You can't have a sudden, a bit of sixes happening in the middle of a quiet phase, and then it again sort of tapers off. It doesn't really help the team reach a good score.
So pacing the innings is the key, right? I want to ask you one last question on this particular story. Then we move on to the what the Prime Minister said on energy pricing. But before that, I want to ask you, Manmohan Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, after the NDC meet, spoke to media persons, and he said he gave us 3 scenarios. He said the best scenario, scenario 1, would be if we achieve 8% growth, if all the policies that the government is planning go through without a hitch. That's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, he said the growth could be around 7 point or 6 point something if some of the policies were enacted and others were stuck in a rut. The worst case scenario he pointed out to us was the worst case scenario could be a growth of around 5%, 5.2% around for the next 5 years if there was another logjam for policy in the country and the parliament. Do you think, which of these scenarios do you see the realistic scenario in the next, say, 6 months to 1 year?
In this next year, it's definitely going to be 5.5, 6. I mean, you definitely don't expect more than that. The issue is whether the next year, that is 2014-15, whether it moves up from there. And that will be the year that will actually decide the course of this plan. Because if that year doesn't, which I'm talking about 2 years ahead, if that year doesn't move, then we are sorted out. And given the fact that the parties are in such a different talking, there's a lot of discourse which probably there's a centralizing tendency, sure. But the point is that the attempt to score brownie points is so high that there is definitely a possibility of slipping back.
Also, there's a chance of policy flip-flop rather than policy priority.
That's right. I mean, you wouldn't like any one of the FDI decisions, and if any group that comes along and says just to prove a point, I'm going to flip it over. You know, it's going to be something worse than a downgrade.
It could be disastrous.
Yeah, it'll be much worse than a S&P downgrade of anything of that sort. I mean, we'll really see the hubris coming.
Right, something for the government to mull about. We'll take a small break, Subhomoy. We'll come back, we'll discuss energy pricing and what the Prime Minister said at the NDC meet. More on Policy Watch on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Policy Watch now. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh gave a clear indication of hikes in fuel and electricity prices in his speech at the inauguration of the 57th meeting of the National Development Council on Thursday. According to the Prime Minister, energy experts are unanimous that India cannot expect to achieve rapid, inclusive and sustainable growth if it's not willing to undertake a phased adjustment in energy prices to bring them in line with world prices. Now, Subhomoy, the most important thing to my mind in that speech was, of course, this. The Prime Minister has made a statement that about making our energy prices at par with global trends. There is a huge difference in the way energy is priced in India. Thoughts on the Prime Minister's statement?
Yeah, it's unexceptionable what Dr. Manmohan Singh is saying. Definitely, our energy prices are way below international benchmark. And we are now moving willy-nilly to what is called an import price parity regime, which means that essentially we will be getting into a regime where coal price, gas price, oil price, and even nuclear, I mean, all this sort of stuff will be priced at what is the international benchmark. So we will be adding a bit of inflation into the system, but at the same time, it is something that will be necessary to drive investment.
But that inflation is going to be short-term. That's what most economists say.
One-off sort of stuff, yeah. But except that, I mean, how it happens and how it is sort of plays out could be a bit dicey, but yes, it definitely will.
A phased elevation in prices is the right way. Say most economists, so does our Prime Minister, of not just petroleum products, but coal and power as well. Reducing the subsidy burden is going to be extremely crucial, isn't it?
Very crucial. That is the big thing. Because when you reduce the subsidy burden, you actually are, I mean, let's put it this way, we are taking away purchasing power from a group of consumer. Now, even if we say that large part of that is actually misdirected, but still there is an element of purchasing power which comes from that subsidy. So government is taking away, cutting away that amount of income from people to other productive use. That's right, they should do it because it's better. But the point is that this is going to create a huge amount of disturbance because it is a major part of lots of houses total disposable income.
Right. It directly affects the middle class.
It directly affects
But that's the
middle
bitter
class.
pill that the government will have to swallow.
Exactly, and that is the bitter pill that they're talking about. It's no one would obviously say it, but it's that the government is actually planning to cut away a part of the income of the people.
Right. I have one more question on it. We've talked about it off and on. You and I have on this very show. It looks like the government will have to bite this bullet now. This is the time. Elections in 4 to 5 states happen in 2013. If this has to be done, this has to be done before that, isn't it? Because if election season comes around, the government will be against the wall. They won't be able to take any policy decisions.
Exactly.
So isn't this the time to do it? The new year, can we see some hard steps being taken? What is your assessment of this?
Yeah, I don't think the mood right now is right. But I suppose, yes, the distance between, like, if you look at LPG, for instance, it's a subsidized gas cylinder costs 400 approximately. The commercial cylinder costs 900. So the distances you got to rise 500 for a cylinder. Now that's enormous. Either if you stick to the 6 cylinder, or you don't, or you say that even this will be, phased out. That will be big.
But right now the government's talking about making it back to 9, increasing it by 9.
Exactly. So that means it's reversing back to quite a bit of the gain that has been made. And the other thing is, of course, diesel.
Right.
That is a big thing. I mean, diesel, definitely there's no reason why diesel prices are being subsidized. It actually is creating a huge problem where none existed before. I mean, what's the need of having diesel price cutting back? Raising diesel prices would obviously mean that there's, for instance, like look at the mega cities around Delhi, Gurgaon, Faridabad, Ghaziabad. Lots of these cities actually live on diesel.
Right.
The diesel generator sits. Now, there the pricing, it's a peculiar thing. It'll actually force the government to ratchet up the electricity distribution network to make up for the gap that will be created when diesel prices go up. So that's going to be quite a bitter pill.
We'll have to see whether the government actually swallows that bitter pill, and when, if it does, when then. We'll take another small break. This next segment we'll dedicate to Mr. Barack Obama and his fiscal cliff. We'll try and understand and make you understand as well what the fiscal cliff really is, and also how the American president and the Congress and the Senate there will try and handle it, and what could be the long-term effects on other economies around the world, including India. That's after the break. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching Policy Watch. Welcome back to Policy Watch. US President Barack Obama and the leaders of Congress held an hour-long high-stakes meeting on Friday afternoon to try and avoid the severe automatic austerity measures that threatened to send that country's economy sputtering into another recession. Calling the gathering good and constructive, Obama expressed hope that a deal could be finalized before the New Year deadline expires. We filed a short story, we filed a package, and take a look.
As the US stands close to the so-called fiscal cliff, President Obama cut short his holiday in Hawaii to air dash to Washington to restart stalled talks with members of a deeply divided Congress. The disagreements are so deep that some are even suggesting that the Congress might have to stretch the New Year deadline. The Democrats and Republicans remain far apart over plans to increase taxes on the wealthiest Americans to help close the US budget deficit. Rhetoric was still harsh on Thursday after months of wrangling over whether to raise taxes and by how much, as well as how to cut back on government spending. But there were signs of a conciliatory note among Republican and Democrat leaders in the Senate as they readied to avert the fiscal cliff. Senate leaders said time is running out, but it's not too late to avert the crisis. But then insisted that Republicans cannot be expected to sign on the dotted lines.
The truth is, we're coming up against a hard deadline here. And as I said, this is a conversation we should have had months ago. And Republicans aren't about to write a blank check for anything Senate Democrats put forward just because we find ourselves at the edge of the cliff. That wouldn't be fair to the American people. That having been said, we'll see what the President has to propose. Members on both sides of the aisle will review it, and then we'll decide how best to proceed.
The tax hikes are seen as harmful by Republicans and some analysts. It's believed over time the loss of income would have a debilitating effect on the US economy. Analysts say sliding over the cliff could tip the US into recession and set back the global economic recovery. So what is the fiscal cliff? On January 1, 2013, tax increases and huge spending cuts are due to come into force, the so-called fiscal cliff. Deadline was put in place in 2011 to force President and the Congress to agree on ways to save money over next 10 years. Fear is that raising taxes while massively cutting spending will have huge impact on households and businesses. The coming days are likely to see intense bargaining over numbers as sweeping tax cuts passed during the presidency of George W. Bush expire. Lawmakers and President Obama are up against a December 31 deadline for finding a way to stop $600 billion in tax hikes and spending cuts from taking effect with an alternative deficit reduction formula. Priority for Democrats is retaining tax cuts for households earning less than $400,000 per annum while raising taxes for the richest 2% of Americans in order to rein in deficit spending. Republicans want to block new taxes, especially for those earning less than $1 million per annum. They are also demanding cuts in some popular healthcare and welfare benefit schemes. An alternative plan proposed by Republican Speaker John Boehner, which would have seen taxes rise only on those earning over $1 million per annum, failed in the House of Representatives last week. Divisions in the two chambers of Congress, with Republicans in majority in the House of Representatives and Democrats controlling the Senate, are also making it hard to reach consensus. Any potential deal must pass votes in both chambers and be signed by the President. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go. Barack Obama has his task cut out of him. Subhomoy, the saying goes, if the US sneezes, the global markets get the flu. What happens if the US market, US gets the flu? That possibility seems large right now, looming large because of the fiscal cliff. What happens if they get the flu? What will happen to us?
Yeah, exactly. But then the point is that they are also heavily invested in the US, in the global market. So I would think a solution would definitely come through.
But the talks have just started. They started yesterday. They couldn't reach an agreement yesterday. But
yep.
Do you think that because of the partisan nature of the country's politics right now, it's extremely polarized, do you think they can actually come to a conclusion and say, look, let's cut a deal right now. Maybe it's short term, but we have to do it right now. Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, most probably that's what will happen. They will cut a short-term deal, and that's exactly what. It will just simply push the problem onto the next year, the next round of deadlock.
One question I want to ask you, and this is for the benefit of our viewers as well, to make it simpler for them. If these spending cuts and tax increases kick in, Americans will have less take-home pay. That's a very simple fact. The US economy is by and large a consumer-driven economy. Couldn't that result in a major contraction of the economy in the next 2 years?
Not really, because after all, the money isn't really being taken off the table. It's simply that if there's a tax if the tax cuts are removed, then basically the government's federal deficit comes down. It borrows less. In that case, the private investment rises. So essentially, that shouldn't be a problem. Similarly, if the expenditure cuts, if those expenditure cuts come through, then again it rebounds to the benefit of the government. So essentially there is, I mean, it's not as if this money is going and getting stored in some vault somewhere, which will definitely mean that the global cycle gets reduced. It doesn't. What happens is that the sections which have got used to a certain system of spending and in getting income, there's an adjustment there, and the US government doesn't seem to be able to sort of reconcile how to make that solution work, seem win-win for everyone.
What repercussions could it have on, say, the Asian markets, or even India for that matter, if in case the US economy does stumble in case they don't reach an agreement? Could there be any possible effects on Asian markets?
Well, you know, actually that's the point. I mean, if they stumble, what will happen is investors will still move to US bonds. The safe haven thing is US bond, Japanese yen, the dollar. And that again means that essentially the benefit for the Indian economy in terms of the money that's coming in, that money gets crippled.
Right.
So actually we don't get a benefit if the US fiscal cliff doesn't get sorted.
Right. On that note, Subhomoy, I'll have to thank you and say many thanks for coming on Policy Watch again. As my guest said, there are, of course, a lot of challenges Mr. Obama faces, but in the short term, perhaps they could come to an agreement. Our first story on Policy Watch this week. The National Development Council met in Delhi. The 12th five-year plan is approved. Growth estimate has been revised for the next 5 years to 8%. The Prime Minister said it's still too ambitious. We agree it is still too ambitious. Domestic demand has to grow. That doesn't seem to be happening right now. Our second story on Policy Watch this week was the Prime Minister's statement and when he said that a relook at the country's energy pricing is crucial. The subsidy burden has to be reduced somehow, and that comes mainly from subsidies given on diesel and LPG. That is a bitter pill that the government has to take in the near future, because elections come up then, and then who knows what could happen. Third story on Policy Watch this week was the fiscal cliff. Now, what is the fiscal cliff? It is the mixture of spending cuts and tax increases that kick in on the 1st of 2013, 1st of January 2013. Mr. Obama is locked in negotiations with both Senate and Congress leaders. We'll have to wait and watch what really comes out of those negotiations. Most probably there will be a short-term solution, but we'll have to wait and watch from news from Washington. That's all we have on Policy Watch this week. Many thanks to my guest, Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, and this is Athar saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching Policy Watch.